There are no audiences yet.
Audience is the YouTube.
Huh?
YouTube.
Yeah, Ashna, we can start now.
Good evening, everyone. We're honored to welcome all the dignitaries, academicians, industry professionals, and our dear students to the Pan-India webinar, Becoming World-Class Faculty in New Order, organized by the Higher Education Forum in association with the Board of Industry Academia Partnerships. We sincerely thank everyone attending for the overwhelming response, as we have with us participants who have registered from across the country. We at BIAP are concerned with enhancing the collective potential of students. We aim to bridge the gap between industry and academia, igniting minds and awakening hearts. That's our vision and mission. The primary objective of every session is to echo its vision statement. We have with us a team of experienced trainers, facilitators, and academicians who have catered to varied learner groups, right from school children, college students, school and college faculty, army officers, police officers, doctors, lawyers, self-help groups, gram panchayats, senior citizens associations, and many more. In its short tenure, BIAP has conducted numerous investor awareness programs and various customized training programs and impacted the lives of more than 3 lakh individuals. We aim at doing so during these challenging times as well, which is why we have come up with an initiative of webinar management. These webinars are available on our YouTube channel, which is the BIAP Official. HEF, which is the Higher Education Forum, is promoted as an advocacy group of individuals concerned with issues and challenges in the landscape of higher education in India. The individuals include representatives from all stakeholders of higher education. The sole objective of the forum is to help create an excellent world-class higher education system in India. This encompasses creation of appropriate structure, strategies, processes, and development of institutions. So now let us begin our session on an auspicious note with the Saraswati Vandana, offering our respect and seeking guidance from the goddess of knowledge. Today we have with us Dr. A.K. Gupta, founder of HEF, Higher Education Forum. He is also a former director at SP Jain Institute of Management and Research and was also former director at SIES College of Management Studies. It's a pleasure to have you with us, sir. I would now request you to take it from here.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Higher Education Forum and BIAP, we extend all of you hearty welcome for this particular program. At the outset, I must congratulate BIAP for the wonderful work they have been doing. I know Viraj for the last 2 years. Viraj for the last 2 years, and I see that the excellent work he has been doing in the area of the promoting various type of networking activities among the youth and the teaching community. It's a good thing. Viraj, all the best to you. Higher Education Forum has already introduced is a forum of academicians, and we do a lot of capacity building activities for the teachers and the students all across the country. Today, we are going to discuss a very important thing, particularly for the teachers, that what does it mean actually to become a world-class faculty under the current world order? Let me try to give basic thoughts on this particular subject. That we are talking about a new world order. And when we are talking about a new world order, there are certain things which are happening in the area of the education, which you and I must understand as teachers. Number one, that education is highly getting globalized. There was a time when the teaching used to be extremely local, it is extremely domestic, etc., etc. But now the teaching is extremely globalized, and by and large, the teachers are teaching the same thing all across the world. So whether you're looking at a physics teacher, whether looking at a chemistry teacher, you're looking at a law, you're looking at the management, essentially the books are the same. Essentially, the curriculum is the same. So how, when the education get that much of integrated, how do I differentiate from the people apart? Other people. That's probably one of the biggest challenges which are facing as an educator. The second is that there is a difference between education and other industry per se. That in other industry, we are talking about an institution. We are talking about an industry product. So when we are talking about a product, let's say an Apple, so we are talking about Apple product. When we are talking about a Microsoft, we are talking about a Microsoft product. But here we are talking about an individual project in some of the teaching or the research output. So there is a difference between an institutional product and an individual product. And what happens is at a ground level, for example, in India itself, we have got more than 1 million teachers today. And if you look into the all over the world, I don't know the exact figures, probably we may be having a figure of, let's say, more than 100 million teachers all across the globe. Now, if you're looking at 100 million teachers all across the globe, how do I compete with them? It's a very, very difficult. It's a very, very difficult denominator. That on the one hand, education is getting globalized. Second is I am competing not only with a teacher in the state of Maharashtra, in the country of India, but also I am competing myself in the South Asia, I'm competing with the Southeast Asia, I'm competing with the Europe teachers, I'm competing with the American teachers. Actually, it is a global competition at an individual level, or maybe it is slightly collaborative level in the area of the research. How do I compete? I think that is second major problem what at an academic plateau we look at. Now, when we look at teaching as a profession, there's a lot of debate that what a teacher is supposed to do and what are the primarily activities of a teacher. Now, American standards, there are various standards in the world. There is an European standard, there is an American standard, there are different types of the standards. But if you look at the by and large, the global standards, there are 4 types of the scholarships we're talking about that a teaching faculty must have. The first is we are talking about the scholarship of teaching, because at the end of the day, we are all teachers, and therefore we must be outstanding as a teacher. What I teach, how I teach, how do I address the issues, how do I make myself relevant to the students community, how do I make myself as a thought leader in the area of the teaching. Probably that's primarily the hallmark of the quality of a teacher. So we talk about scholarship of teaching. And 80% of the time, the percentages may vary from the university to the university, institute to the institute. But essentially, in Indian situation, we are all primarily teaching institutions, barring a few institutions like Indian Institute of Science or Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. But all other institutions are primarily teaching institutions. And 80% of the time, we are evaluated based on the teaching. So one focus is that if I really want to become a world-class faculty member, I must be a world-class teacher. So that's one aspect we're going to discuss today, that how do I become world-class teacher? The second aspect which we talk about is the scholarship of discovery. Now, when we say the scholarship of the discovery, we are talking about essentially fundamental research. That means, how do I create something? How do I innovate something? Because at the end of the day, the job of the teacher is not only to transmit the knowledge or to transform the knowledge. The job of a teacher also to create or a co-create or recreate the existing knowledge and try to transfer the knowledge so that it becomes relevant to the society at that particular point in time. And this is what is called scholarship of discovery. And therefore, that's what we're talking about, a teacher as a researcher. First, I talked about teacher as a teacher. I'm talking about a teacher as a researcher. And therefore, the second point which we have been looking today seriously is that how do I become a world-class researcher? The third is, which we talk about, is the scholarship of application. But there is no point in talking about a basic research. There is no point in talking about a theory. At the end of the day, we are all in an application-oriented world. And therefore, if the knowledge is to have an impact, it has to have a practical impact at the ground level, improving the productivity, creating a better world, creating a sustainable economy, etc., etc. I'm talking about, I must be socially relevant as a teacher. And that's what you're talking about, a scholarship of application, that how do my teaching, how does my research actually become strongly application oriented? And that is the third scholarship which you talk about, the scholarship of application. And finally, at the end of the day, that scholarship is available to only very few people like maybe Albert Einstein or those type of people is available. What we talk about, the scholarship of integration. That means how does my knowledge integrate with the other components of the world? I may be a teacher on physics, but how do I integrate my research findings in the areas which are related to the history or the social science and so on and so forth? And that is what we talk about, scholarship of integration. So we are talking about scholarship of teaching. How do I become world-class teacher? The scholarship of discovery. How do I become the world-class researcher? Scholarship application. How do I create a knowledge which can really be application-oriented? And finally, the scholarship of integration, which is not very much applicable as far as the Indian teachers are concerned. So these are the four scholarships actually which are extremely important, extremely relevant today to make a successful teacher. Now, I may be a great teacher, I may not be a great researcher. I may be a great researcher, I may not be a great teacher. I may be a combination of the two. I may be a great teacher as well as a great researcher. I mean, so those type of people are very few who are a great teacher as well as a great researcher. There are people actually, but the people are few in number. So that's the context actually in which we are meeting today to understand that how do you become a world-class teacher? How do you become a world-class researcher? And what, when you say world-class, what does actually mean? And what the Indian faculty should do to become a world-class teacher. These are the four aspects we'll be talking today, discussing today. We have four experts with us today. We have with us Professor Peter Cunningham. Professor Peter is the Professor Emeritus from the Nelson Mandela University, South Africa. He's with us. Professor Peter. Professor
Hello.
Peter. Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. We have with us an outstanding teacher also with us, Professor Shanti Rajan. Professor Shanti Rajan.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Good evening.
She's the director from the University of Stirling, all the way from Dubai. So she is with us. Then we have with us Mr. Totati Raman. Mr. Raman.
Yeah, good evening.
Mr. Totati Raman is a very, he's not directly a teacher or an academician, but very strongly associated with the quality standards of the higher education in India. He has been as a journalist. He has been a very strong teacher, and he also formed a company which is called Standard for Educational Advancement Accreditation. In short term, that is called a CR Trust, and that's about 8-10 years before he started this particular trust. And it is an advocacy group for the international accreditation in the country today. He's a very strong academics oriented person. So we have got Totati Raman with us, and finally we have with us a teacher from the ground, Dr. Dinesh Harsolekar. Dr. Dinesh. Dr. Dinesh. Dr. Dinesh.
Good evening, everybody.
Yeah, Dr. Dinesh is the
Hello.
director of He is the director of the IES Management College and Research Center, a very strong academician, teacher, and writer of the books. So I think let's go into that. So let's first look into the views of Professor Shanti Rajan. And Professor Shanti will be focusing on how do I become a world-class teacher. Professor Shanti, the floor is open to you.
All right. A very, very warm welcome and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to Dr. Sen, Higher Education Forum and BIAP for this fantastic platform. And what a beautiful topic at that in terms of, how do you make yourself as a world-class faculty? And I would want to look at this particular concept a little differently, if you will. Now, given the radical transformation that we have faced in the recent times, and it goes without doubt that one need to understand the current academic landscape and make those continuous adaptations should we wish to face any kind of challenges to begin with. And obviously, we are all going through a very, very rough time, the COVID-19 pandemic, and that has really opened doors in terms of how we can, the world has become very small because technology has advanced so much, and therefore how we can adapt to that kind of, open platform, if you will. But are we really adept in terms of making those, challenges in terms of mindset? So that's why I said I would want to look at it a little differently as to how you can go about being or calling yourself as a world-class faculty. And to this particular context, how has the role of an educator changed, or how is the role of educator changing or continuously evolving? And why is it important for us as educators to have a shift in mindset if we have to? I mean, this is going to be a kind of a new normal, if you will, because I'm not sure whether we are going to be slipping back into the kind of way we were working before. Maybe we will, but definitely with new terms and conditions, if you will. So how are we therefore going to adapt to that kind of a new normal? So in terms of, the academic continuous changing landscape, how are we as educators going to be preparing ourselves to have that shift in mindset? So my take on this is, for us to kind of move away from this concept of being very teacher-centric. We need to be having a different role as a teacher. We have to be calling ourselves as facilitators of that change process, and as opposed to a teacher. So this perhaps is one way in which you and I as educators can differentiate ourselves to be called as a world-class faculty to begin with. What do I mean by a differentiation here? So when I'm saying we are moving away from a teacher-centric to a learner-centric approach, with us being a facilitator, essentially what we are doing as a facilitator is we are creating or we are encouraging a learner-centric environment. And as educators, we need to be taking onus or responsibility of making our students independent learners. As teachers, this has been my philosophy all the time. I have always believed in creating academically competent students or independent learners, critical thinkers. You want your students to have that kind of an indefatigable spirit, or you want your students to be having that inventive zest and energy. So what is that you can do as a teacher to help your students move that way? So, and hence, in my opinion, this kind of gives rise to a paradigm shift in teaching and learning in a controlled curriculum and a controlled environment. Now, I say controlled because the curriculum, the environment, and all are kind of set to test the students within an established domain and a norm of syllabi, if you will. So over the last decade or so, my experiments towards testing this philosophy have been to flip the centric approach to kind of, make it very clear. Now, simply put in a traditional metaphor, when I say flipping, it essentially means trying to influence that dais. And that is what I'm talking about now, moving away from a teacher-centric to a student-centric, moving away from being called as a teacher to a facilitator of that, the whole learning process. And student-centric approach literally begins by giving the credence to what they have learned up until that point, their background, their cultural settings, and to kind of recognize those to build that edifies for further learning. So this, in my opinion, is what makes better students in particular and a good global citizen in general. So as a teacher, as a facilitator, what is that we can do to help, that? If you have to call yourself, creating that truly global citizens as students, and what is that you can do in terms of making the change or the change in mindset of you being called as a global, a faculty or a world-class faculty. So student-centric approach goes much further than that prescribed syllabi, and it kind of inculcates that behavioral and cognitive skills better than the traditional one. So what essentially I do is, when you're saying you're facilitating that change process, what I do is I facilitate learners on drawing certain milestones and guiding them in terms of how to reach those milestones. So what I have done is, all I've done is to simply facilitate their thinking in the direction that is to cohabit their purpose of the moment. And teaching environment, therefore, takes us in a new dimension and a new form of engaging all the stakeholders more than ever before. And this is why I say now there is a good unison on all the objectives. So to kind of sum up, if you want to call yourself as a world-class faculty, what is the kind of change that you would need to do in terms of, moving forward? And as teachers, therefore, the point I'm trying to make is to encourage something which I advocate, which is called the LPO, a learning process ownership. And what I mean by learning process ownership is essentially empowering my learners to take charge of their whole learning process. And with us as educators, moving away from this concept of being a teacher-centric, take the role of being a facilitator. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what I would want to say, how you would differentiate yourself as a world-class faculty. And possibly how I do what I do, I could give a lot of examples, possibly towards the end when we are having a question and answer session. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Sen.
Thank you, Professor Shanti. That's a wonderful exposition. That what do you mean by shifting from the teacher-centric to the learner-centric, and how do you do that process? We'll come back to you later on that. As I told you, the second point was how to become the world-class researcher. And we have a world-class researcher with us, Professor Peter Cunningham. So Professor Peter Cunningham, your thoughts on how to become world-class researcher?
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate being able to share some of my thoughts. I think that much of what we've been discussing to this point reflects not only the underlying requirements for teaching in general, but also for researchers. But let me phrase possibly 4 themes which will guide my actual consideration of the topic. First of all, that of contradictions. Secondly, the politicization of research. Thirdly, the truth as relative. And fourth, we'll look at very closely to what Dr. Sengupta was talking about, benchmarking. But when we actually look at research and we start looking at, well, how do we become world-class researchers? I think we need to unpack exactly what is actually happening in the world of research. And there we see a number of contradictions. We see the almost nationalization of knowledge, although we've spoken about the virtual world, but we see a nationalization of knowledge versus a global knowledge transfer. Now, what is actually happening there? There's a lot of nationalism around research at the moment, almost people wanting to retain the sole rights to that knowledge because of certain monetary value of the knowledge, which is slightly a contradiction to what we see as the globalization and the platform that we're actually speaking on. And this is to a large extent being pushed by allegations to a large extent of research theft, if we could put it, of seeing that a lot of scientific knowledge is being sought by people in rather unacceptable manner. Now, the consequence of this is almost a global competition versus global cooperation in terms of knowledge. And when we look at that, we see that it is becoming increasingly difficult to establish globally diverse research teams, which are now being more and more obstructed by government intervention and the concern of copyright and ownership of research. And this is something a little bit of a minefield which researchers have to now navigate to ensure that they are becoming globally competitive as researchers, but still being able to retain their national identity and the various rules and regulations that they need to comply with. So we're ending up with a sort of a complex relationship between an integration of how research should actually be done, as well as almost a rise of nationalism that is permeating research. And this is almost a contradiction to what research should be looking at, namely the global upliftment and empowerment of the majority of individuals. Now, in terms of the actual looking at becoming a world researcher, at the moment now, the focus is very much on knowledge for social justice and equity. However, the other contradiction there, it versus knowledge to retain the current power elite. So we see when we're actually doing research, we actually are negotiating between the social justice and the current power elite in terms of what is actually requiring. But doing that, there is almost a redefining of the knowledge gap as a consequence specifically of events of the past year, of where it has so closely resembled the classic divisions of research and teaching and communities. And we've seen increasing amount of social divide. And the research that is coming out of this, or the pressure coming out of this, is to look at what is socially appropriate research. And there it closely relates to the previous speaker. We need to actually make sure that our students know the community that they're actually involved in. And we as researchers understand that community, as well as teachers understand the community in which they're actually imparting their knowledge. Which really boils, in terms of the contradiction, we can see probably 3 points that are emerging. An emphasis on research that will be led to a more equitable society that is more tolerable and inclusive and realizes the potential of all members of society. There's more and more emphasis on this type of research. Secondly, research that leads to more self-sustainability of the individual, of the community, of the society. And thirdly, we see research that advances the peace agenda, that will lead to a less aggressive de-escalation of conflict within the actual nation state, as well as in the broader society. And I think those three, to a large extent, if one is looking at entering into the research forum or actually advancing oneself in the forum, one needs to be aware of equitability of society, self-sustainability, and the peace agenda that is actually now very prominent in research. My second point, namely the politicization of research. What we've seen, particularly over the last year, is increasing the amount of political implications of the recognition of the results of research. And this can be very frustrating to a researcher that believes that research in some way is there for science and for scientists to accept. However, we need to have to navigate again the ideological interpretations of research within the community, specifically at a political level. And this can lead to a number of confusing positions, particularly for a new researcher. Because in many cases, the research is often premised on the advancement of the political agenda of a particular group in power. And this can be very frustrating. Next point, when you're actually looking at becoming a world-class researcher, and again, I say COVID has raised this more than any other event in our recent past, is that truth as relative. Which can be very, very difficult for scientists to actually accept, but more so what we've seen the general public being totally confused by the fact that the various processes and procedures and strategies that are being implemented around COVID often defined as scientifically based only to lead to further scientific debate as to what constitutes the actual reality. Now, when you actually look at this, I think it closely relates to our teaching agenda, that if we are going to teach, we're really teaching future researchers. And what we're teaching them is a constant questioning of realizing that knowledge begets knowledge, and that in order for that knowledge to be relevant, it must translate itself into the lecturing environment and be unpacked to encourage questioning, remembering that the students that we're actually teaching are effectively the agents of future knowledge creation. Now, looking at how do we actually then handle that in the class to ensure that our education is premised on research, is that we need to supply, as we heard in the previous speech, the constant awareness of self-reflection, an open mind to change, and the development of those analytical and critical skills. And I think this, if I was to put one criteria which is most important for a world-class researcher, is to be able to be that openness, to ensure that one constantly is allowing new thoughts, paradigms, methodologies, etc., to permeate your activities throughout the research process. I get to my last point, namely benchmarking, which comes closer to what Dr. Sengupta said about teacher as a researcher, is that one must remember that what we are actually involved in is almost a massification of education. And in that process, we're also having a massification of research and the generation of new research. But related to this is an interesting, through this massification, what we've seen is a new criteria for performance management and quality assurance, both as lecturers and researchers, as students now become much more aware of what constitutes good research, good teaching, bad teaching. As their new benchmark is much more their peers, both nationally and internationally, which has the potential of raising the bar of the type of research that is going to emanate out of the actual COVID epidemic, as well as the type of research that is going to be published, is going to be far more scrutinized by a much broader group of people. This has meant that what we've seen is research moving from a very closed space to a more transparent, globally accessible space. And as we see in our discussion today, it is far more open to interpretation, to debate, etc., as to what we actually say. So I think as we move forward, we need to actually grasp this transparent space and improve our research methodology as well as the actual topics which we're involved in research. Thanks very much. I look forward to actually engaging with the questions.
Thank you, Professor Peter. Thoughts were quite abstract, but they were pretty meaningful. We'll come back to it at a later stage. Tota Tiraman, sir, if you can share your thoughts from an international accreditation angle, that when you say that the teacher should be world-class, how do you define that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. It's a great opportunity for me to speak here at this kind of a forum, because the previous two speakers and Dr. Sengupta, all three of you set an interesting agenda, basically to say that the faculty should really be global and should be aware of the challenges which are there in front of them. Whether they are teaching, whether they are researching, they have to really know the new world order, which is to a large extent, Dr. Cunningham's really put it very, very, very blunt and very, very straight. There is a lot of nationalistic selfishness that is there in the research as such, which is across the world. It's not just one place. So in fact, it's kind of nostalgic in a way that 13 years back when we set up standards for educational advancement in 2008, Dr. Sengupta was also consulted at that point of time, and he was also present at our first ever conference that we did. Our idea was basically that addressing this issue that India was a very, very highly teaching-centric academic world at that point of time. So what we thought was, let's get into international accreditation and bring all the international accreditation systems to India. So in the process, we'll expose our faculty to international benchmarks of quality. And in the process, they will be able to, frankly, become global faculty as well, mindset-wise at least. This was the idea. So 13 years down the line, if I review what is the progress that we have achieved, I think considerable amount of progress has been achieved, really. If you see the direct or indirect impact of international accreditation in India is phenomenal. There is large number of faculty today are aware of the international benchmarks of quality, and they're able to institutional benchmark their own institution to see that what are the trends that are happening elsewhere. So it's kind of, to a large extent, we have sort of impacted on the faculty thinking process in India. So this is a long, big topic, so I will not get in there. I'll try, okay, there is a disable of screen sharing over here. Okay, just give me a second. So screen sharing is not enabled here. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, let me not get in there. Let me just quickly tell you, I had prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which we can share later. That's not an issue. So let me talk about it. So international accreditation is essentially mission-centric. There's a central mission, which we all have to accept, first of all, and communicate to the accreditation agency that this is the mission that we are aiming at. So, and we have to stick to the mission and make sure that every process that is there in our institution is centered around the mission. So this is the very primary aspect, which has been absorbed now in Indian academia at this point of time. And international accreditation is also peer-reviewed, mentor-based, focused on continuous improvement, focused on institutional growth, benchmarked with the best in class. The best in class is a key word, where each of us cannot be obviously talking in terms of Harvard and Kellogg and Wharton and stuff like that. We should not even be looking at it. We should look at our own class where we are and strive to be the best, benchmarking ourselves with the best, and then move to the next class. So in other words, it's a continuous improvement process. So this is what the international accreditation really aims to achieve through peer review. So the peers are also of the type that your own institution might be able to provide. And leadership and faculty and student, both on all the three aspects, where the leadership means we are talking about the management, the investors and others. And when we talk about faculty, faculty also should emerge as leaders, and students also should emerge as leaders. So all the processes that we are having in our college when we are going for international accreditation should ensure that all the three are aiming at leadership, which is the reason why almost all the international accreditation system we track, ACSB, ACBSP, AMBA, AFMD, ISCBE very, very closely. All the five of them, in fact, emphasize on leadership as their primary aspect in terms of dealing with the entire process of how the institution will move forward. And focus on quality of courses and pedagogy and assessment. Assessment is a very important aspect of international accreditation. So this is also a great awareness that has come to Indian market today, where people are talking in terms of the course itself is built-in assessment processes are there. And so therefore, we do get quality as we go along. And the core focus is on strategic management, innovation, support for learners, faculty, and staff, and thought leadership. And finally, what Dr. Cunningham says, social impact. Ultimately, everything is measured through the social impact the institution has been able to create. So each of the accreditation processes, like ASCSB, for example, has got 9 standards. Then you have EFMD, which has got about 10 standards. And then you have AMBA, which has got principles, 10 principles once again. Then ACBSP has got its own standards, which is today at 7 standards and so on. So all these things are enumerated in my presentation, which is quite a long presentation, that's the term, which can be shared. But the bottom line is very simple. If you're talking about a world-class faculty, what you are supposed to be, that's what I will end up basically saying what is expected of being a world-class faculty. What's expected is very precisely that the faculty should be focused on collaborative research, very basic thing, and should encourage its own institutions to go for collaborations in a big time, which is again was not the focus when we started out in 2008. There were hardly any collaboration at the point of time, and today we have practically all the top business schools, about the top 100. In fact, I've got each of them an average of 3 to 4 collaborations, and some of them having 30 collaborations and so on. So this is something which is completely new, which happened because of international accreditation. So what is expected of the faculty is this, that they should be able to work with other faculty elsewhere, publish, participate in international events and conferences and seminars as a matter of routine, and develop courses, once again, collaborating with their peers, not only within the country, but also with the member schools of international accreditation agencies. This is one of the other aspects that is coming into India. We have something close to today about 100 internationally accredited schools, which means basically that they are having access to more than 2,500 internationally accredited schools across the world, who are the member schools. So in other words, you have peers who are ready to help you. So there is a large number of movement of faculty which is going from here to the international markets, and the international faculty are coming to India. So this kind of a movement is also something which has happened, which within the last 1 decade or so. And the faculty who are really want to become global have to really be aware of this aspect of it and make sure that they participate. One of the things that I always emphasize when I speak to faculty is this. I've addressed more than 100,000 faculty in the last, let's say, 10 years or so, and 500,000 students. So wherever I speak, I basically tell people is saying that be open, be adaptive, don't be rigid, and continuously learn. Like, for example, one of the questions that I would definitely ask is that last 3 months of pandemic lockdown, how many of you have actually acquired a certificate? There are any number of international certifications that are around, which are 1 week to 2 weeks to 3 months. And how many of you really actively participated in getting them? Now, the international accreditation agencies do have criteria that captures this aspect of continuous learning and improvement. So this is one aspect which the faculty should really focus on. And there are many more which the process really helps to imbibe. And the entire process is anywhere between a year and 7 years, which means you can imagine that there is a huge amount of interaction that takes place among the faculty who are guiding the faculty here in India, or if the Indian faculty is guiding an international campus. So this kind of a two-way movement, three-way movement, these things also help tremendously. And of course, the whole process is quite rigid in a sense of the term, and quite uniform and across the accreditation systems. One thing that we realized after we got very close to all the international accreditation systems is that, yes, there are nuances, mostly nuances only, but essential core is same, where we are talking in terms of quality, we are talking in terms of continuous improvement, we are talking in terms of benchmarking with the best in class. Those are the few things. That's about basically what international accreditation is expected to do and what the faculty are expected to react to. Thank you.
Thank you, Raman. I would say briefly you spoke about it. We'll come back to regarding the peregrine assessment, etc. later on, little bit. But essentially, what Tatadi talked about is one particular thing, that learn from your peers, collaboration. So the more you collaborate with the foreign institutions, more you participate in the foreign events, the more you get yourself acclimatized with the global systems, their processes, their teaching methodologies, do research with them. Probably you will also try to become a globally accepted teacher. That's a well taken point. And the last speaker of the day, now we have Dinesh with us, Dr. Dinesh. We would like to know, you are a ground level teacher in India, but what are the 5-6 things which Indian faculty should do, in your opinion, to become a world-class teacher? As a teacher, you can say.
Thank you, Dr. Sengupta. And first of all, I would like to thank Board of Industry Academia Partnership and HEF for providing me this particular platform today, and the company of 4 really world-class speakers. When Dr. Sen Gupta spoke to me, what he expected, that particularly talking in the Indian context, there is a huge variety of education institutions. Some of them have a lot of resources, very comfortable. At the same time, many of them are struggling to create their resources. And therefore, when the faculty members work in these institutions, only because of certain constraints, certain limitations, they feel that they are not able to do what they want to do. So therefore, first of all, I would like to say that when we talk of world-class faculty, we are not talking about world-renowned faculty. What I mean is we are not competing with anybody. What we have to ensure, whatever we do that with excellence. And that is how we can become world-class faculty. The earlier 3 speakers have spoken about different facets of how one can become a world-class faculty. What I am expected to talk about, particularly in the Indian context, that there are many educational institutions where faculty members work under certain constraints. Now, before I talk about those constraints and what faculty can do, what I would like to clarify, even if you look at the Western world, maybe they are slightly better than India, but one cannot say that any institution works without any constraint. Yes, constraint may be limited, may be huge, but constraints are always there. So therefore, we cannot keep complaining about constraints and keep giving excuses. That is what I personally feel. Now, what exactly we mean by various constraints? Maybe faculty members get very limited exposure. They don't get opportunity to move out. They don't get chances to meet outside faculty members, outside institutions, and therefore their exposure remains restricted to their own institution. Maybe there are constraints related to the resources available within the institution, especially we are talking about the academic infrastructure. These days, we know that we cannot just talk about the library. Institutions have started calling them as information resource center and not merely libraries. There are huge online resources available, but then how many institutions are really providing all those resources to their faculty members? So therefore, sometimes people feel that there is a resource constraint. In some cases, people feel that there are constraints related to their environment. Environment is what? On what terms they have been appointed, what kind of workload they are sharing. There are many education institutions where faculty members have too much of teaching load, and because of that, they feel they are not able to do what they want to do. Sometimes even management expectations also may become constraints because management in different institutions may have different kind of expectations. For example, somewhere some management may say that we wish our faculty members to spend substantial time in administration, which faculty members don't like. But because it is an expectation of their management, maybe they have to do something about it. And lastly, I would say in the Indian context, there's a big constraint that there is a big gap between industry and academics. So the board which is working towards this, I really think that they are doing a great job, because in India, still there is a gap between industry and academia. So therefore, industry support is another big constraint when we talk about the Indian context. So as I said, nevertheless, whether there are constraints or no constraints, one is to prove himself or herself. When you are working as a faculty, we must know that we are judged by our own students, our peers, and our superiors. Our superiors are maybe dean, director, management. And finally, we are also judged by some external entities like the academic world outside, like the regulators, like the industry. So therefore, when we have to prove yourself as a world-class faculty, you need to satisfy the expectations of all these stakeholders. So Ma'am spoke about how to be a good teacher. So if you could prove yourself, maybe you are meeting the expectations of your students. Similarly, if you could prove yourself as a good researcher, maybe you are meeting the expectations of your peers and your superiors. Also, the academic world, the regulators, industry, they expect you to be an all-rounder. You cannot be just a good researcher or a good teacher. So in short, there are different parties or entities which are interested to know what exactly we are doing. Now the question is, despite all these constraints and expectations, how one can prove oneself? So the first thing I would like to say, constraints may be there, but these days, all of us are living in a digital world. And I think digital world provides us unlimited opportunities. And many of those opportunities are either free or at a very, very low price. So therefore, we need not look at our employer or our institution that what kind of resources I am getting. So therefore, first thing is faculty members must learn how to make use of these digital facilities which are available. Apart from that, if maybe it may sound a bit philosophical, but I am of the firm opinion that if a person has a passion and self-motivation, then no constraints can come in your way to excel. So that is very important for a teaching profession, that a person must have a lot of passion, and whether you are getting any motivation from your employer or not, but there should be a lot of self-motivation. Another thing, very important thing, many people choose their institution or their employer based on some criteria which are not really professional. For example, I may choose an institution which is very convenient for me to travel. Now, those are really wrong ways to choose your employer. What I'm trying to say is, you must be very careful which institution you are working. Try to collect a lot of information about that institution, about the management, about the dean, director, what kind of opportunities they are willing to provide you, what are their preferences, what has been the track record of the institution, and after that only you should take up employment in those institutions. When we talk of students, I think we should not restrict ourselves only to teaching. As teachers, as faculty members, our responsibility is the overall development of our students. And therefore, our responsibilities are not restricted only in the classroom, but outside the classroom also we need to keep on meeting students. We need to work as their mentors. We need to work as their facilitator. And all sorts of help and assistance which we can provide them outside the classroom is equally important as what we provide in the classroom. Professor Raman spoke about learning. It is very important. Faculty members must always work for their personal growth. So learning should be never ending. So how do you do personal growth? Not only learning through books or research, but how often you go out, how often you participate in conferences, seminars, how often you go to other institutions, talk to the faculty members. I mean, one can do a lot of things to grow in your professional field. Industry interaction. I said earlier that this is a big problem in India, especially. There is a gap between industry academia interaction. But what I feel, faculty members can take initiatives on their at personal level. What they can do, they should attend a lot of conferences, seminar where many industry people come, and then try to network with them through these events. It's very simple way to connect with industry. Especially in the business schools, all the students, they go for their summer projects and faculty members work as their guide. They should make this opportunity, take this opportunity to develop relations with the people in industry. Because when students are working in industry, faculty members should go and visit that company and they would know who are the industry people guiding their own students. So these are some of the initiatives they can take at the personal level. How many faculty members are active on a social media platform like LinkedIn? It's very important for faculty members to be on platform like LinkedIn because it's a professional social media platform. It is not like some other social media where people talk about their photographs and birthdays and things like that. So therefore, this is another thing faculty members can do to get close to the industry. Second thing, another thing is we must be open to talk to our senior faculty members and get mentored by them. Generally, when I'm teaching, I'm a faculty member, I like to restrict myself to my own work. It is a wrong approach, in my opinion, because in every institution, you will find a lot of senior faculty members. They have a lot of experience. So therefore, young faculty members should always go to them and take their guidance in teaching, in research, and in many other areas of student development. Next point I would like to mention is how these faculty members work with each other. How are their interpersonal relations? This is very important. As again, Mr. Raman spoke about collaborative work, and Mr. Peter spoke about collaborative research. In fact, there is also a concept called collaborative teaching. Now, if you want to do collaborative research, you want to do collaborative teaching, all that is possible only if you are very comfortable with your colleagues, with your peers. So therefore, we as faculty members should always get along with our peers, with our colleagues, and try to see if we are able to do some good quality collaborative research and collaborative teaching. Even my experience shows that this collaborative teaching is very, very appreciated by students. They like it because on the same topic, maybe sometimes on the same case, they get to hear different perspectives. So therefore, this collaborative teaching is equally important. Faculty members should also develop contacts outside their own institution, within India, within your own country, as well as outside your country. Because if you have to do world-class research, it's very important that you get in touch with some faculty members who have done some research in your area, your expertise, and they are well known in that field. So if you could get associated with them, if you are able to do some joint research with them, if you are able to write and publish joint papers with them, that will bring a lot of quality in your work. Last couple of points which are very small but important. Faculty members should not restrict themselves to only academics, but they should become members of a lot of professional bodies, because through these bodies, they get a chance to interact, to network with professionals in their field. And one final point I would like to mention, we hear a lot of things about many educational institutions. Faculty members should set very, very high ethical standard. Their ethical conduct and behavior is very, very important. So they should behave in a way that students look at them as their role models. So therefore, these are few important points and very basic points I wanted to speak, that how one can really prove himself or herself and try to become really an excellent faculty or a world-class faculty. So Dr. Sen Gupta, thank you very much for giving me this chance, this opportunity, and also thanks to the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinesh. See, three things came out of your talk very, very well. I think that hit at the crux actually. One is that you must achieve at excellence. Whatever you do, you must do with an excellence. You may not become a Harvard Business School professor. You may not try to become another thought leader like Michael Porter, etc., etc. But you should try to become excellent what you do. And second, you talked about that whatever you do, you must do with a lot of passion and motivation. Because once you are passionate, once you are motivated, no amount of constraint can stand in your way. And third thing, which probably many people talked about, is that collaboration is the name of the game. So if you really want to shine, you collaborate either with the senior, with the junior, with the students, with the research world, with the outsider, industry, whatever the collaboration you want to do. Without collaboration, with a silo mindset that I am alone, I can do it alone, that shall not work at all. All over the world, if you look at the papers today, there is a recent trend. And the trend is there are very few papers which are published by alone. There are very few books that are being published alone nowadays. You will see all books, all international journal publications. There are more number of people are collaborating today to write those books or to write those papers. Therefore, collaboration is the name of the game. Thank you, Dinesh, very much for bringing out these 5 points. I'll take just a couple of points actually. Just very quick reaction I need. Professor Shanti, if I get your reaction immediately, that you talked about a flip concept, that moving away from the teacher-centric to the student-centric. How does a teacher do it? What is the process?
Right. That's a fantastic, way. Like I said, I can possibly give some examples. So when you are saying, why is it important for us to have that flip, in terms of creating academically competent students, and why is that we have to give students that ownership in the whole learning process? What essentially happens is when you're very, very tutor centric, ideally what a teacher does is, teacher goes into a classroom, spend that 1 hour, 2 hours of, the time that you have, literally being the focus point of the classroom. So you're not literally engaging the students in that particular context. So when you are saying you're flipping, you're essentially like all the three of the panel members were saying, collaborating with the students, allowing them to take onus of the whole learning process, empowering them. So when you are saying, for instance, when you are teaching a concept as a facilitator, what you're essentially doing is teach them the concept and then allow them to construct meaning in terms of what they have understood. So in this particular context, when you are particularly saying, how are you going to flip that? So you are giving that onus to the students. For instance, if you are telling them, let's have a case study discussion. So when you are allowing or giving students that kind of an onus or the responsibility to share their thoughts, what you're also essentially doing is helping them to work together as peers. And when the students work together as peers, they are sharing with each other what they have learned and understood. So you're ideally talking about giving them that kind of an onus or that empowerment, and that's essentially what we're saying, move away from that or flip that thing where it's the teacher who does all the thing. Stop spoon feeding your students. And if you want to create academically competent students, if you want to create critical thinkers, allow students to construct knowledge, allow them to take owners, in the whole learning process. So collaboratively, we can do that as a teacher student. And essentially a point which the last member, Dr. Dinesh, was talking about is when you're talking about never restricting it only within just teaching. When you're saying, have team teaching, collaborative teaching, bring the academic interface, and give students a real world experience so that you are preparing students for the real world and, making them academically very, very competent. So this is what I meant by flipping, the centric approach, giving students more onus, and all you're doing is being a facilitator of that learning process ownership. Over to you, Dr. Sen.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Professor Peter, I've got a question for you. You talked about relevance. You talked about the research should be relevance. Now, you have been coming to India very often, and you are more Indian than South African. So if you can say some 5 topics which are relevant in the Indian context across the social science spectrum. You may not be able to say about the science spectrum. We'll be happy if you can tell it. But across the social science, can you tell some 5 research projects which a faculty member can do? 5 topics which are relevant.
That's quite a big question, but I think let's take the 3 points that I did make, which I think cut across all the disciplines. I think one, the whole issue of sustainability. I think that is core to every discipline, that one needs to actually look at, is your research directed either economically, politically, or environmentally to the concept of sustainability and ensuring a greater sustainability in terms of food security, etc. The second one, I think, which has emerged very strongly as a topic, to what extent is the topic or the knowledge gap that you're actually identifying in some way going to lead to a more equitable, inclusive society? To what extent is the topic that you're researching going to allow for a more inclusive type of society that's more equitable? The third one is very much what is emerging now as a research, has always been a research topic, but is now emerging more so, and it relates to the first 2, is that of to what extent the topic that you're investigating is going to lead to a society which is less conflictual. And there again relates to things like resource availability, It relates to economic as well as political power, etc. In terms of more industrial related topics, I think that there one is looking to what extent is industry actually in its activities linked to social development, sustainability of a particular society. So the type of topics that I certainly would recommend is looking at what are the implications of more people involved in power sharing, to what extent is there politicization of research, but in terms of actual topic, I would probably say that topics that link to how do we actually get society to be able to deliver more to a larger group of people. So if you look at your massification of education, is the same way that we're looking almost as the outcome of any research project should look at to how is that research project in some way allowing a more equitable, advanced, self-developing type of society.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Peter. Now, one of the aspects Raman talked about very strongly, that the International Accreditation Agency looked into the assessment part of it very strongly. With assessment is a crucial issue, because at the end of the day, assessment tells whether learning outcomes have been achieved or not, and whether you could achieve what you wanted to achieve, either out of a course or a set of courses or a specialization or a program as a whole, MBA program or BBA program, whatever program as a whole. So assessment of the learning outcome is a very, very important thing. And we technically talk about formative assessment, summative assessment, all those things. One of the major problems which we face in India is the assessment is either internal. I teach, I assess. That's not fair. That if I only teach and I'm only assessing, of course, it happens in Harvard Business School also, but they are the teachers are of a different league altogether. But Indian situation, if I teach and I only assess, there could be some amount of problem. The second is I teach and the normal assessment takes place by an external body, and that is an UGC or university or whatever it is, a semester and examination. That also does not serve all the purpose, because university exams have got its own limitations. And therefore, for the assessment, there is something called external evaluation, altogether an external evaluation, wherein you can come to know whether the student has achieved what is expected to be achieved out of a particular course or a set of courses or a program as a whole. So there is a very good test which is available in the world. There are many such, but at least I have undergone one particular course and I have administered it several batches of the student, which is called a peregrine test. And Totadi Raman is an expert on that. Totadi, if you can spend a few minutes on peregrine.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. One of the, in fact, when I was narrating about the history that we had ourselves undergone over the last 13 years, one of the other things that we really did was we fairly early understood that the issue really is assessment. Assessment is not happening in the realistic sense of the term. And all the international accreditation agencies, for example, are asking for, say, assurance of learning of ASAP, a good example. When you say assurance of learning, what do you really mean? What you really mean is that at all levels, have you really been able to deliver what you assured your students? And this assurance is linked to your own mission itself. So in the mission, you have stated something, and then you say that I'm going to deliver this for you. And at the end of it, have I delivered? Now, the question is, to answer that question, you need to have to come with formative assessment or a summative assessment, depending upon how you do it, whether internally or externally, as Dr. Sengupta was enumerating at this point of time. So what we did was, at that point of time, we contacted an assessment agency called Peregrine Academic Services. This is in the US, and we brought them to India because at that point of time, ACBSP Standard 4, which continues to be even today, talks in terms of student learning outcome as an essential aspect of having undergone the international accreditation process. So this particular agency, that is Peregrine Academic Services, which is now called Peregrine Global, they have a good track record in this area. And they brought the international accreditation, whoever is undergoing the international accreditation process, they brought their assessment process. For example, if you take assurance of learning of AACSB, today the process that they have adopted, Peregrine, is pretty much suited to AACSB as well. So now they work with all the accreditation systems. They started with ACBSP, of course. Now they are working with, I think, barring the exception of EFMD, they work with all the accreditation systems today. So this is something that we have been able to successfully bring in. Tied with this is also a resource center, what we call as Peregrine Resource Center today. And this resource center also has a lot of material. One of the most important aspect, which is, again, we did not quite mention it here, is the new type of case development tool and case assessment tool, which is built into one, which is basically when you teach a case, most of the cases that you teach are sort of dated, probably 4-5 months old, unless you develop it yourself as a live case within the campus. Now, this particular organization tied up with Bloomberg Business Week. And Bloomberg Business Week is basically a world leader in terms of business stories from about 1,200 different bureaus that around the world. They bring in latest information and knowledge distilled into articles. Now, that article is used as to develop by a team of academicians from across the world, once again, into cases, short cases, very, very quick cases, where there is a certain kind of, treatment that is given to those articles, and they are developed into short cases. And these cases are available in Resource Center. In other words, what we really are talking about, nearly 500 to 700 cases that gets developed in a year. And all of them are contemporary cases, which probably would have happened about a week back or 10 days back and so on. So this another aspect that was brought in to Indian context. Now, if you look at every international accreditation system which is operating today and what they are asking for, they definitely are looking at student learning outcome as a primary goal. AMBA, for example, definitely is much of its processes are centered around what did the student really learn, and how do you demonstrate what the student has actually learned. So the simple process, the assessment process is about 100 questions, about 42 subjects, in which probably at random the questions can be picked up. So there's a question bank, and then you sit and ask the student to give this particular test. And at the end of it, whatever, it's 3 minutes per question, and each question is about 5 different answers, 4 to 5 different answers. And you are supposed to be knowledgeable in order to pick the right answers. So obviously, you have learned. So that learning is assessed. And at the end of it, there is an assessment tool that has been built into this whole thing. And the same thing can be worked out for different subjects. So this is being done across all the subjects, individually or collectively. So there is a lot of work that is going on today in this particular field, I think, which is very relevant. So thanks a lot. I don't want to say more than this because that's not the marketing job that I'm doing right now.
Thank you.
Okay, and for any information or knowledge about this Peregrine, you can come to our website, crstandards.org. Then you'll find plenty of material on this. And then we certainly can guide you on this. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr.
Thank you. Let me add about Peregrine only one thing, that once you finish the assessment, that means the student has finished the assessment, it all depends upon student. You can finish it in half an hour also, you can finish in 2 hours also. It all depends on quality of the student.
True.
Immediately,
Absolutely.
you can evaluate yourself behind all others in your class. You can evaluate yourself any other institute in the country which is undergoing that particular accreditation. You can evaluate yourself vis-a-vis South Africa and any of the institute which is undergoing that particular accreditation. Or you can evaluate yourself against the global benchmark also. So what we are talking about benchmarking, global benchmarking of a student, because it is a global test and the results come automatic immediate basis. So there are several such agencies which are available. So I thought, let me just throw that an idea about it. Before we open the question for the audience, One last word from Dinesh. Dinesh,
Yeah.
you have talked about 13, 14 points. What is the top most important from Indian perspective for a teacher to become a world class? One, only one.
It's difficult. I think we are lacking in two areas: world-class research and industry support or industry interaction. So I think these are two areas we need to work a lot.
What should a teacher do?
Yeah, teacher should get in touch with the industry people through his personal contacts, as I said, either through LinkedIn or by attending various seminars, workshops, conferences, and should try and find his way out how we can reach out to industry people. And then
Fair.
collaborate with those people, show them what he or she can do. And as so you said in the beginning that the research which we do need not be only very basic or fundamental, but should be of social relevance. Now, the research which you do, if industry is not able to use that research, I don't think industry will look at you, because then they will see you are doing only basic research or fundamental research. So therefore, you can do applied research only if you are regularly in touch with industry. So that is what I think is most important for Indian faculty or in Indian situation.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think we have come to an end of our part of the session. Now the floor is open for the question answer. If the moderators have collected any question answer which have come, I think we'll be too happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for such an enlightening and informative session, sir. Now I would like to begin with the Q&A session. Due to the time constraint, we're only taking a few questions, but I would like to thank all the participants on YouTube for such a great feedback. Your positive comments mean a lot to us, and we believe the knowledge shared with you today would help you in the future. So the first question we received from Priyanka Chatta, which is, how to connect with international faculty members for research opportunities?
Totadri, would you like to attempt the question?
Okay, I just want to refer back to what one of my colleagues here was saying about being able to proactively participate in conferences and seminars. That is the best ever way in which you can network. So you just go to any of the conferences. Now, in fact, it's more so you can, for example, conferences like this, webinars, make sure that you spend at least every day, definitely go in for one webinar or the other. So you will get to spot faculty of your choice in your area. You should be able to. Then you should be able to correspond with them. And it's a very small little thing, effort that you need to take. You have to be visible. That's the only way you can actually do this sort of collaboration. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Peter, you wanted to
add? Possibly one of the best ways that any student can do it, particularly also faculty, is internationally. Virtually every university has what is called an international office. That office would normally be able to direct the student or the faculty member to the specific individual in the institution who is actually conducting research in the particular field of interest. I strongly advise this, and I see that what we're going to witness in India over the next 5 years is international offices established at institutions will become a very important channel to advance internationalization of research between institutions using that particular mechanism of an international office. Many faculty and students don't have access to conferences, etc. And therefore, I strongly suggest if they are interested to actually contact international offices, and they will then direct them to the particular individuals of interest.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks
Let's go to the
so
next.
much, sir. So the next question is by Dr. Sudha Subramaniam. So she asks, can teachers collaborate for teaching across universities? Can we have independent modules with certification? And are there any specific recognition criteria?
What is that? Come again, question.
Can teachers collaborate for teaching across universities? Can we have independent modules for certification? And are there any specific recognition criteria?
See, I personally don't think there is a formal system in India that exists like that. It happens in a very limited way in India today, that the people are invited, etc., etc. But the idea is good. We will try to promote it. Idea is good.
Okay.
At
Can I add on something,
yeah, please.
Dr. Sen? Yeah,
no, I was just wanted to say Indian context.
Yeah.
In India, at this stage, I mean, this type of that going across to the universities, this system is there. I'm not telling it is not there. Supposing somebody invites me to take a class somewhere there, I go there. That's a different thing. But this type of certification, etc., we'll try to work it out. Yes, please, madam. Please.
Right. Yeah, I think now since the world has become very digital, and this is something which a lot of people have asked me as well, would there be opportunities for, academics from different parts of the world to be doing possibly one session of a module or being guest lecturers? So it's kind of, from our perspective, it's really open. We don't have too many restrictions, but in terms of certification and recognitions and things like that, it's something depending from institution to institution. But from our perspective, can teachers be collaborating with international universities in terms of doing guest lectures or possibly even a particular module? From our end, I think we are kind of very open to that thinking, honestly.
Okay.
Next
question.
Can I add, Professor, for a second on this?
Yeah, please.
The same, the Peregrine Global that we're talking about, they do have assessment and certification per subject in terms of the faculty wants to get themselves assessed as to whether they have really, have the knowledge, depth of knowledge in that particular field. And this particular assessment is actually done by peers across the world. So in other words, there is a certain kind of peer recognition for your knowledge. So there is certification available for separate subjects, individual subjects. It's available.
Let's go to the next question, please.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question is by Mr. Nitin Kulkarni. And he asks how to integrate the research into teaching.
How to integrate research into teaching? Dinesh, would you like to react?
Yeah. Again, what happens, again, if you speak in the Indian context, generally teachers have to teach as per the set curriculum. And therefore, they get very little liberty to integrate their research into their teaching. But now there are many institutions where they are able to devise their own curriculum and introduce their own courses and own modules. So I have seen this. Now many new modules have been coming up, which are basically based on the research work done by faculty members. But what happens, you cannot introduce a course based on a small amount of research you have done maybe for a few months or maybe a couple of years. If you really want to bring your research into the classroom, then that research has to be very, very extensive as well as intensive. And the faculty must have worked on that research for a long period. And then only you can bring that to the classroom. But again, that research may be of interest to a limited number of students. And then the faculty should be willing to teach that work, that research work to that limited number of students. But it is very difficult to generalize in the Indian context at the moment. But there are some faculty members who have done that. And in my own institution, I have permitted that to a couple of faculty members to bring in their research work, especially in the field of, for example, mergers and acquisitions. Now, the course may be very well established and very old course, but I have encouraged my faculty to bring in her own PhD work in the classroom while teaching this particular course, mergers and acquisitions. So it is certainly possible.
Now, I think one minute. I think nothing stops you if you've done a good research, and if you're teaching the same subject or related subject, or if you're involved in a collaborative teaching, nothing prevents you from bringing your research input into the class. Yeah. In my teaching career for 30 years, I have discussed not less than 50 to 60 research done by me into my own classroom. Yes. I used to teach only through my teachings, by research work only. I never used to take the help of a research of outsider. I always used to teach through my research output. So it all depends. I mean to say, I think management, as Dinesh talking about, they're quite supportive. You go and ask their director, this is what my research is, and this is what I want to teach in the class. I don't think there should be an objection if there is a rationale behind the whole thing. and if the management is convinced. Rather, it should be encouraged.
Can I add something here, Dr. Sen?
Yeah.
Yes, it is something which I also advocate. I call that as RITS, that is research-informed teaching strategy. So ideally, when you're talking about being, like we were talking about the flipping the centric approach, so we are saying, how do you create that critical and academically competent students? It is so important. I have done that myself. When you involve your students to be part of your own research. And, that is something which, that's what we also call as collaboration. You're bringing your students to be part of your research. So we are saying having a kind of research informed teaching strategy, RITS, and I've actually written it in one of the paper as well. So a RITS strategy is definitely something which most of the academic institutions are kind of encouraging, because that essentially makes students very independent to be part of learning with you in that whole research process. So I think, yeah, I kind of agree to what Dr. Sen said. Thank you.
Sorry.
Any other question?
Sorry. Can I just add a point?
Yeah, please.
Can I just can I just add a qualifier? I strongly support what we're discussing. The only principle that it needs to be guided by when you start using students in research is that the ethics clearance for that research is very, very well written to ensure that the student is not vulnerable in the actual process. But I strongly support it. I also think that probably we need to move from a lecturing more to a reading. And when we start talking about getting students to read, we're actually encouraging them indirectly to be researchers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any other question?
Yes, sir. Last question. It's by Selena Joy. The question is, what is one of the biggest challenges for faculty in India to reach world-class levels of excellence?
I think so many constraints have been talked about. It's a more of a perceptual constraint. I mean to say, I feel there is a constraint. I personally don't think there is any constraint. If you really want to become a world class, you can. Dinesh?
Yes, you are right, 100%. Sir, I agree with you. This is what I said in the beginning, that constraints are always there, and no organization or individual works without constraints. But one doesn't have to think about it. It's a perception that I don't have this facility or that facility. If I'm determined, I will be able to find my way out, and then I will be able to succeed. So therefore, constraints, I think, just for thinking or perception or imagination.
Can I?
I'm just, last word.
Last word on this. I'm trying to share yes, I've shared a link for a form. It's a survey form basically about which you can yourself answer why you want to be a world-class faculty over here. So you see those questions and then you'll be able to answer. I think all of the audience would be able to really answer this one, and probably we'll share the outcome of this. It'll be interesting for you to see that how does one become a world-class faculty. Yeah, thank you.
Any other question? Otherwise,
no, sir.
So on behalf of higher, so this brings to an end of this program from our side. On behalf of the Higher Education Forum, I thank everybody, all the panel members who have been a great support. I think, because of the time constraint, we cannot go into any subject detail, but we have tried to see that we are touching the most intricate aspects that go into making a world-class teacher. We hope that you will find it useful. In case of any doubt, any clarification, you can write to us. We will be in touch with you. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, sir, for such motivational words. Now this brings us to the end of this engrossing and really, really informative session. So I would like to express my gratitude towards Dr. A.K. Sen-Gupta and HEF for taking the time to enlighten us with this extremely helpful session. And I sincerely thank all our participants and panelists, Dr. Peter Cunningham, Professor Shanati Rajan, Mr. Raman, and Dr. Dinesh Harsulekar for associating with us for this webinar. We're also thankful for the overwhelming response and active participation from our participants. We certainly hope that this session has been productive for all of you and wish that the knowledge shared with you today helps you in the future. The link for the feedback form will be shared on the WhatsApp groups. Kindly fill in the same and we will be mailing the e-certificates to you in a week's time. For such more insightful and valuable webinars, Check out our YouTube channel, which is the BIP Official. Like, comment, subscribe, and press the bell button for latest updates. For more details, contact us at reachus@bip.in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.